is the Public Services Librarian at the Allen Memorial Library, the University of Hartford's Music and Dance Library. He currently serves as NEMLA's Member-at-Large and Chair of the Education and Outreach Committee. He has contributed substantially to the development and testing of LibLime Academic Koha since Hartford started using it about 4 years ago as part of WALDO, the Westchester Academic Library Directors Organization. Sam has focused in particular on the development of Koha's OPAC displays using XSLT customization. He presented on this topic for the 2012 Waldo Koha Users Conference and at the 2013 MLA Conference as part of the Emerging Technologies and Services Committee panel discussion, Discovery, Interfaces, and Music. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. All right. I'll leave that there. All right, thank you. Before I get started, quick show of hands, who attended the MLA session where I spoke for about 3 minutes on XSLT? You moderated, you don't care. Okay, so for those of you who were there, I do have a few slides that were on that presentation, so I'm sorry about that, but it's much more expansive than that. So about 2 years ago, I had absolutely no idea what XSLT is. And I'm sure most of you are in the same boat. And if you do know what XSLT is, maybe you don't know how important it actually can be to libraries, specifically to library catalog, bibliographic data displays. So I'm hoping that within the next 30 minutes, much like me, you will think it's pretty much the awesomest thing ever. That's my goal here. It's a fairly lofty goal. Before I explain what XSLT actually is, I'm going to give you a brief tease of it and show you what it can do. See it in action. Okay, this is a CD. There are 2 works on the CD. There are 2 concertos in D, one by Beethoven and one by Brahms. Because they cannot physically be in the same space at the same time, one is listed above the other. But as we know, the Beethoven is not really any more important to the CD than the Brahms. They're of equal importance. And really, we should view them as such. So next I want to look at how these works are cataloged. And specifically, I'd like to look at well, I guess we used to call them uniform titles. Now we have to call them preferred titles. Thank you, RDA. So as dictated by the cataloging rules that we're all familiar with, the first work is cataloged as a 100 to 40. So the author's 100 and the uniform title, preferred title, is the 240. And sorry if the display looks a little weird. This is actually the primary way that Koha displays the MARC record in the OPAC. It looks kind of strange, but that's what it looks like. So the second work is cataloged as an added entry as a 700. And you have the author or the composer and the title together in one. So this is nothing new. Just making sure we all starting from the same place. Admittedly, this is kind of an odd way to catalog these 2 works. Again, as I said earlier, they are really of equal importance. So it is a little odd they are cataloged differently. But this is our national standard. And although this does cause a lot of frustration for ILS developers who have to work with strange quirks like this, we are paying them to do this, so you would expect that they could handle something like this. So let's take a look at how it is normally displayed. Sorry if any of these are your catalogs. What I did, and this was with the help of my student workers, thank you to them, we looked at about over 400 catalogs, looking at this specific CD and how it displayed. And again, looking specifically at I'm just going to keep calling uniform titles, I like that more. Looking at the uniform titles and how those were displayed. What I'm about to show you is highly representative of everything that's out there, so I'm not picking on these 4 particular catalogs. This is really only what's out there. We did not find a single example that does what I'm going to show you in a second. So this first example, This comes from, what's this, I think III. So this one splits the primary author, Beethoven, from his work. So they're in two separate lines. And then much lower down on the page, we have the second work, Brahms, who is not split from his work. So that's kind of odd. You know, patrons certainly would not expect us to look at the top and the bottom. This is an Endeavor product. So now we have the main entry even further split. So we have the title at the top, then we have the 245 title statement, and then we have the author, the composer. And then at the very bottom, we have Brahms, not even linked up this time, which is kind of weird. And actually, going back a second, the first example, the added entry, if you will, is kind of mixed up in all the performers, which are all the other 700s, of course. In the second example, at least, the performers are somewhat separated from the composer work. All right, a third example, this is from the discovery layer viewfind. So the main entry author, Beethoven, is at the top of the page. Even further down, we get his associated work, his concerto. And then similarly to the previous example, we have Brahms and his work even farther down the page, pretty close to the performers. And lastly, this is one of my favorites. This is from a catalog called LS2 from a company named TLC. Has anyone heard of that one? I have. I see one head nodding. No one else has.
LS2000?
On their website, it says LS2. I don't know. I never heard of it. But I'll give them credit. They are the only one that I really saw that actually put the two titles together. Now, of course, they leave out Brahms entirely. Those titles are in reverse order. So the first one's actually Brahms, the second one is Beethoven, and they're incomplete. So I give them a little credit for getting it all together, but it's not very good other than that. So again, these are highly representative of everything that's out there. This is just a small sample. Everything looks like this. And so it's very clear that either we don't have the tools or we're not using them, and I find it hard to believe that across the country no one's using the tools that we're being given to improve these displays. So I think the natural conclusion is therefore that the vendors are not giving us tools to properly work with these displays. So now let's look at Koha. So this is the University of Hartford's catalog. What I'm going to show you is actually Koha's default view. This is perhaps the worst one. So Beethoven's there at the top, and between Beethoven and his uniform title, which is lower down the page, is Brahms, his uniform title, which is surrounded by all the performers, and you notice Brahms is totally out of order. Violin, orchestra, opus 77, D major, concertos. Not correct order at all. I think it's alphabetical. Yeah, there we go. That's useful. And Beethoven's is obviously incomplete as well. So, lest you think that I'm just making fun of all the other catalogs, Koha is just bad. However, this is the University of Hartford's current display using customized XSLT. So what we have here, the two works listed together, nothing to distinguish them as an added entry or a main entry. We have complete uniform titles, they're in order, and then just for good measure, the 700s that don't have titles are grouped together under something called people/groups involved with this recording. Pretty straightforward. So we were able to achieve this through customizable XSLT, and that's why it is awesome. So this is kind of the tease, to get you interested to see what we're kind of talking about. But now I'm going to do what so many suspenseful TV shows do and go back to the beginning, where it all started, instead of telling you what XSLT actually is. We'll get to that then. So this is our brief history of Koha. Koha was founded in 1999 in New Zealand. It's an open source ILS. It is a full ILS system. There are a few things that are kind of missing. You can ask my colleague, Jen Olson, cataloging. Some things missing there that we would like to have there. but it is a full ILS. It is actually free. So anyone who wants to have Koha can go onto the Koha community website, download it, and if you know how servers work and you have the server, you can get it up there and start using a free ILS. It's a wonderful thing. It was designed, I think I said, for public libraries first. So it's not entirely useful for academic libraries in its original form. So we'll get to that in a second. Traveling Indiana Jones style across the world, we get to 2005, when the company LibLine was founded in Ohio. So LibLine was founded basically to provide support, hosting, and development for libraries who didn't really want to try and figure out how to host it themselves. Again, although it's free, difficult to do, and then it's hard to get the development to improve it. And so they started working with a bunch of academic libraries to create essentially an academic library version of Koha. And one of the greatest collaborations they have is with Waldo, which is the Westchester Academic Library Directors Organization. And it's very apt to get Where's Waldo jokes, of course, which I will spare you from right now. I lost my voice like 2.5 weeks ago. It's still not back to 2%. Again, all right. So, as I said, they joined with Waldo, and the University of Hartford, although we were not originally a member, an actual member of Waldo, we joined for the purposes of this project. And I believe Boston Conservatory is also a member now as well. So in 2009, we actually went live with Koha. It was in, was it Bastille Day, I think it was? 2009. So we're approaching our 4-year anniversary with it. And then in 2010, LibLine was purchased by PTFS. We were afraid that would be the beginning of a long story that, you know, all the other legacy ILS that have gone through. But it's actually worked out fairly well, I think. They've actually been able to continue development at a somewhat enhanced rate. So overall, it's been a good thing. PTFS is, they're another vendor who provide mainly government contracts, I think, dealing with ILS software, content management software, and so on. They are based in Maryland? Yeah, that's where that dot is. I knew I put the dot there for some reason. They're based in Maryland. So they bought it out. And there hasn't been any talks of a buyout of them since then, so we're doing well. Ever since we started with Koha, however, one of the big things that all the libraries keep saying is, hey, we need this field here, we need this subfield here. So eventually, we were just kind of like, hey, can you just make it possible for us to do this on our own? Make it customizable so we can put in whatever data we want. And we asked for that pretty much from the beginning, and then continued to ask for specific subfields when they were giving that to us. And one of the projects PTFS took on when they took over, oh, by the way, they kept the name LibLine for this project, so if I say LibLine, I'm still talking about the current one. The one they took on was giving us this customization. So in, let's see, it would be around 2010 or 2011, we started hearing this phrase XSLT, and we were told, well, this is the customization you want. We're like, oh, okay, that's cool. We had no idea what XSLT was, we didn't know what it would do. And then finally, it was delivered to us in January of 2012, and there was much rejoicing, especially when we started to look at it and realized what it could actually do. So the big question, what is XSLT? Question I haven't really answered yet. So we begin with here. Let's try this. There we go. We begin with Mark, what we're all familiar with. And so here is just a very small piece of Mark. Catalogers, did I do okay? Yeah? All right, so you know that's good. So this is Aaron Copeland's 100 offer field. Behind the scenes, this gets converted into Mark XML. If you're not familiar with XML, I hope you're familiar with HTML, because XML looks a lot like HTML. It uses the tags, and it's basically specific to a particular type of content. So Mark XML is a variety of XML that is specific to Mark records. So it looks a little bit like that. Well, not a little bit, it looks exactly like that. So we, instead of just saying 100, we now have a data field tag, and that's where the 100 information is kept. The indicators are attributes of that tag, and then within that you have subfields, subfield tags that indicate the actual subfields. So we have a subfield tag with attribute of code equals A for Aaron Copeland, and D for his dates. So that's basically the Mark XML. And then this is where the XSLT comes into play. XSLT is a specific code that interprets that Mark XML and converts it into HTML. So basically what we have access to is, at its most root level, we have access to the bibliographic data and tell it however we want it to appear. So we can turn it into something like that. Now, that's very simple, of course. This is just an H5, heading 5 tag with Aaron Copeland and his dates in it. But if you look at the things we do here, we add a specific tag. We add a class of author, which means if we have customizable CSS, we can make it look like what we want, modify the fonts, the color, and so on, which Koha does have customizable CSS. The word by, that's not in the bibliographic record, we added that there. We specified the order of the subfield, so subfield A first, and then subfield D second, and then we close the H5 tag. So there's just a little bit there, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So basically what this XSLT allows us to do is specify what fields and subfields appear in the display, how they display, where they display, and under what conditions they display. And that's actually the biggest one. I'll get to that in a little bit. All right, so let's look a little bit at how XSLT is constructed. All right, so we have a line of XSLT at the top and my little translation at the bottom. So this is the XSLT for that little blurb we just saw in the previous page. So the first thing we have is an if-then statement. If there is a tag 100, it's basically what that says, or a field 100, which pretty much always is. Then do everything that comes next. So if there's a 100, we start this H5 HTML tag. Next, we add the word by, and that could be whatever we wanted it to be. I chose the word by. Well, actually, I suppose I didn't choose that. I think that was in the default XSLT, so someone else chose it. You could write the author is, something like that. Doesn't matter, whatever you want. And then this is a code saying every time there is a 100, or for every 100 field, do what happens next. Now, of course, there is only one 100 field. Well, let's say you're working with subjects. This means you could say for every 600 or 6xx, do the following to it. So display it in this manner. And then this is a little bit of code that just says add in the subfield A and then add in the subfield D. If I wanted them in different order, for some reason I want dates first, I would just flip those. That's all there is to it. And then of course I have to close all my tags, just like you would in HTML. Okay. So again, very simple example, but that shows you the building blocks of XSLT. All right, so I mentioned earlier, you can determine under what conditions a field appears. So this is thanks to if-then statements, which are common to pretty much any type of programming code, but something that allows us to do a lot here. And to me, this is really the true strength behind this customizable XSLT, and we'll see why. So here's a list of potential if statements. So these are conditions that could need to be met for an action to occur. So for example, if this is a sound recorder, display it this way. If this record has a 240 field, display this. If this record has a subfield T, if this is an RDA record, that's right. For anyone who's worried about how their catalog or their OPAC is going to display RDA records, we don't have to worry about that at all because we can just go ahead and plug those fields in. I think I already did that for the new 240 266 publisher field. Get that one right. 264. It's close. Reference library. That was pretty good though. So we do have to worry about getting those fields into the cataloging module and making sure they're indexed properly. But in terms of the display, we're not concerned about that at all. What else? If the text in this field matches text in the previous field, I'll show a little bit of example of that later. If the first indicator is 1, or if the 100 field has the word Batman in it. Yes, I did program that into our catalog, just for fun. All right, so this is a list of then statements. So if the initial action or initial statement is true, then do this. And these could connect to any of the if statements. Then use this font, then remove this text, and enter this different text. Then leave out this field, then link this using the text in this other subfield, then insert this HTML, then display the subfields in this order, or then insert a Batman logo. That one may have been specific to one of the ifs. We have one book that has Batman in the title, and there's a little Easter egg Batman logo in that one. No one's mentioned it to me yet, so I don't know if anyone's actually noticed. All right, so really the only thing that's limiting us is our own creativity in thinking of how we can display this information to be beneficial. We're not limited by what the vendor thought of. We're not limited by add this field, add that subfield, or don't add this field, don't add this subfield. We can do pretty much whatever we want, which is really, really kind of good. And we've had a lot of fun with it. Well, I have at least. All right, so now you have an idea what XSLT is. I'd like to show some examples specifically of what we've done at the University of Hartford to improve our displays. In particular to improve our displays based on what the Koha default was. And by the way, if anyone's interested, this is the actual XSLT code for our details page. If anyone wants to look at it afterwards, I have it here. It's based initially on the default Koha XSLT page, because it comes with the default essentially. You can modify that as you need to. So it's not like you have to start completely from scratch. You can just take one little bit at a time to change. All right, so this first example, this is the 245 title. So at the top we have the default Koha display. At the bottom is what we have now. So the issues with the top one are it doesn't have the subfield C. So we added that in. So we have basically the complete 245 title statement now. We discovered soon after that if we specified the order that the subfields should appear in, then it was causing some issues because there were a few cataloging situations where C came before B. I don't entirely know why, but that's the way it worked. In order for it to display correctly, we needed to maintain that. So we were able to develop a little bit of code that basically said whatever order the subfields show up in, put them in or are cataloged in, display them in that order as well. So that was really helpful code. It cleared up a lot of confusion. Made some really funny records actually when you switch the C and the B, and they're not supposed to be. We removed everything from the subfield H except for that / There's code that's basically offensive. If the subfield has these characters, get rid of them, but leave the slash. We felt that the fact that it was a sound recording was pretty obvious elsewhere on the page, and it was just kind of mucking up the display. But we need that slash to be in there to maintain the formatting. Otherwise, it would say, in that example, BWV 1028 Bach instead of / Bach, which would look kind of weird. So that's what we did with the 245. Apparently I made it so I have to click to see these changes. That was not intentional. So this is pretty much what I showed you earlier. So at the top is the original display of the control name, names and name titles, the 1XX, 240s, and 7XXs, which apparently I said, so you couldn't see the changes. That's awesome. So the things we did here, this was a very important if-then statement. Basically said, well, first I said, show the 100, 240 under works on the sound recording. And then I said, if the 700, well, look for all the 700s. If the 700 has a subfield T, then display it. And then later on, under people/groups involved with recording, said, if this 700 does not have a subfield T, display it here. So that's how we were able to separate those. Because the data is all there in the bibliographic record. The XSLT just has to pull it out properly, which is what a lot of the OPACs are not doing right now. We also made the uniform title complete, separated, again I said separated the 700 FTs, and specified that wording there, where it says people/groups involved in this recording. So if this is a DVD, it says, I think, involved with this video. And I think the works on this sound recording changes to works associated with this video, because it made more sense with the type of data that was showing up. So depending on the format, we can change the text that's showing up. So we're not limited to the same generic text that tries to capture everything, but then doesn't really capture anything. All right, for the subjects, this one's not as music specific, but originally they were just all in a row like that, not really easy to read, and they didn't differentiate between where you put them in the subject. So we put them in a vertical list rather than horizontal. Apparently I put a tab there, I don't know why. And we put little carrots, arrows on it, rather than dashes. It looked nicer. And we set it up, and this did require some JavaScript, but again, Koha does allow you to do customizable JavaScript as well as XSLT and CSS. So we were able to set it up so if you clicked on popular music, it does a subject search for popular music. If you click on writing and publishing, it does a search for popular music, writing and publishing. And that's been really helpful. That's something where we were actually, we had seen, I can't remember which one it was, maybe Viewfind, but we were kind of inspired by a feature that we saw in Discovery Layer. Instead of adapting that Discovery Layer, we just said, well, we can develop this tool, this feature into what we have. We have the tools to do that. Okay. So on the results page, we changed the title and author a little bit. Some similar things that I did on the details page. So we have the nearly complete 245, just the same thing I did with the subfield H with the slash. But if it's a sound recording that has a 245 subfield C, which should be the statement of right responsibility and thus should have all of the composers listed, we got rid of the by line, the by so-and-so. Because that data was already there, it was kind of mucking up the results, and as we know, there's lots of bys on the sound recording, so it was just difficult to read. Instead, we added the 511 performer note, because that generally had better detail than what the 700s had anyway. For example, it says that he plays the cello, he plays the piano. That wouldn't have been in the 700 initially. So that was a beneficial change. Results page author. Unfortunately, the best example we have was a Stravinsky set that it said by Stravinsky, 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 Stravinsky. It was almost his entire works. So there's a lot of Stravinskys. But we've separated that into different CDs, I think. So that example no longer exists, unfortunately. But this is a pretty good one. By Mozart, 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 Mozart. So it repeated for every single instance of a 700 and 100, the author. So basically, we consolidated that. And this is the code I mentioned earlier saying, compare this tag to the previous tag. If it's the same, don't show it. So it's not quite perfect, because if you have Mozart as a 100, then a Haydn 700, and then another Mozart 100, then you would get Mozart twice, because there's a Haydn between them. But it's much, much closer. And so we no longer have any of these repeated composers in our results displays. Let's see. Right, so up there, the Beethoven songs, if you saw that and were asked what type of format it is, what would you guess? CD, because there's a picture of a CD. Our patrons amazingly thought the exact same thing. I just don't know why. But this is actually an LP. So it uses the generic sound disc label for both of them. And they used a sound disc icon to show it is. So yeah, that was the first thing we changed, I think. So now it uses actually, I think, the size of the disc to determine whether it's a CD or LP. Because it's not looking at the item type at all, separate from the mark record. It's not looking at the item type. It's looking at the 07, 08, one of those. Catalogers? Okay, it's one of those. I'm looking at you, John. It's either 07 or 08. I always forget which is which. But it's looking at that to tell the dimensions of the disk, and uses that to determine whether it's a CD or an LP. Shows the proper icon. So amazingly, I had to create that based on the other icon, because there's this giant set of icons that had a CD but it didn't have an LP. Weird. And then added the text LP. People don't ask anymore, can I have this CD? And then we say, I'm sorry, that's an LP. Also, it always had the text literary form next to a CD, which didn't make much sense. So we got rid of that. I think it had to do with some improper coding at some point. All right. So the availability information is not technically part of the MARC record, but the way Koha manages that is to put that data in a 952 field. And so because that was in the field, we're actually able to do more with that in terms of the displays. So at the top is the original display, which really confused people because they would see 2 available, 2 withdrawn. Well, that means there's not available for me because they're both been withdrawn. But really it means there are 2 on the shelves, and then there's this other 2 that have been withdrawn. So we modified that to make that a little more clear, add some icons, including the partial availability one that looks kind of like MasterCard. And made sure all the items were accounted for. Originally, not every item was accounted for there. Okay. So really quick, I'd like to do if I have time. Do I have time to do a live demo? I think we're running ahead anyway. Yeah. All right, let's see if I can do this. I know you're not supposed to do live demos. It's always dangerous. But we're going to try it anyway. Okay. I assume we got a browser on here somewhere. Where do I have to go? Down there. Okay. Mind if I open your browser, Anna?
That's fine.
Awesome. Okay, you seeing it? Yeah. All right. So first we're going to go to, helps if I don't write question marks instead of slashes. Hartford, staff, Waldo. People always ask why we have Waldo in our URL. It's because of the Westchester academician, my reduction. All right, so I'm working in our sandbox here. We have a testing database separate from our live database. So I'm not going to mess with any of our actual live data. I would get some angry emails about that probably from the people who are still behind. Waldo.sandbox.koha.library.com. Okay. So this is the, did I just get really loud? It sounded really loud for a second. Once it loads up, there we go. This is the default view of Koha. This does not have any of the changes the University of Hartford has made in it. We've made a whole bunch of changes, including CSS and JavaScript, so it doesn't look really anything like this anymore. But I'm going to bring up a CD here. I'm not going to mess around with the results page because for some reason they changed the way that works. In order for XSLT modifications to show up there, you need to re-index the entire system. So it takes forever for those changes to happen. All right, can you see that all right? Okay. Now I'm going to, you get to see a little behind the scenes. Oops. Helps if I put my right username. Blur that out or something for the video. Okay, so all I have to do is go to my preferences. And here is the XSLT. This is the default code that comes with the with Koha. All right. So right here we have our byline, by, Bach, and so and so. So if we want to change that, we could just do, let's see, this item is lovingly created by, and save. And drum roll, please. There we go. So that easily, I was able to change the text in the display. Or, let's see. I'm going to Unfortunately, every time you save it, you have to go back in and reopen it. That's one of the annoying features. All right. Let's say I want the 100 to show up, but not the 700. All I have to do is get rid of where it says or at tag equals 700. So the code initially was saying, look for every instance of a 100 and every instance of a 700. Now I only want to look at every instance of a 100. And sometimes it's a little slow to load. Okay, well, let's. What happened to the rest of it? Did I mess something up? I think it's just, there we go. Okay, and so now it got rid of the 700s. So it has 7 10s or 7 11s, so I didn't get rid of those. But regular's gone. That easily. I'd have a music history professor would be very upset with me for getting rid of regular. Or let's see. Let's go to the 245. And I'm just going to, so remember I said that the 245 initially doesn't have subfield C. So I add in subfield C. And there we go, there's subfield C. So you have to understand the code in order to do this, but once you get it, it's really easy to make these changes, which is wonderful and really powerful. All right, let's see, where did the, all right, where is the actual presentation? I lost it. There it is. Slideshow. Okay. That was your live demo. So, there we go. Why does this matter? So we have Koha. How many people here have Koha? Okay, a handful of people. So most of us don't have Koha. So why does this matter to you? First of all, this is not an attempt to promote Koha. There are a lot of other issues in Koha that I'm not talking about today. So I would be actually kind of hesitant to encourage you to talk to your administration and get Koha. But what this really is a model for how systems should be doing this. There are probably other ways that a catalog could give you these options in as much depth as what the XSLT is doing for us. Because what it allows us to do is not beg for individual fields and subfields anymore, and we shouldn't have to do that. So we should really be talking to our vendors and getting features like this developed so we have the power to take care of it ourselves. And if different systems are all using customizable XSLT, we can share among different systems. Even if you're on a system that's not Koha, because XSLT is just working off of Mark and Mark XML, the XSLT would essentially be identical. So we could share little snippets, we could share them in their entirety, and then something that you developed that I thought was a really brilliant display, I could use for our library and not have to recreate it from scratch. So if you want to learn XSLT, if you decide you want to get it, I do have a tutorial that I wrote about it basically for the Koha libraries to look at, but there's the URL. I assume this will be posted on the NEMLA wiki, so you don't have to bother writing this down now. There's tutorials at W3 schools, if you're familiar with them. XPath is kind of connected to XSLT, so you kind of have to learn both. And then if you run into any issues and can't figure out how to use code, just do a Google search. Pretty much every question you could ever have has been discussed on some forum out there. So all the answers are there. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions? Yes?
Isn't it the code, can you machine generate the code, or do you have to hand code every single new CD that comes into your library?
Well, you're not creating XSLT specific to a particular CD. You're creating a generic XSLT that applies to everything. It just takes whatever marked data it gets and turns it into HTML. So it's not specific to CD or any other. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you know of any other ILS systems that do use XSLT?
I haven't run into any. Discovery Layer Blacklight, is that the right name for it? They're doing something close. I looked a little bit behind what they're doing, because who spoke about Blacklight?
University of Virginia, Winston.
Yeah, Winston. He spoke about it at the same presentation I spoke at, so I looked into it afterwards. And from what I can see, it's probably not quite as powerful, but it's better than a lot of what's out there. But I haven't seen any other XSLT. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any. And if you do a search for XSLT, Koha comes up basically. Yeah.
How often do you make changes to the style sheets?
I did a lot really early on. Basically, as soon as we got access to it and I realized what I could do, I basically did this. I printed out the default XSLT, because it was easy to read that way, and made notes and figured out how it works. Again, I had no idea what XSLT was or how it was coded. And then started making a whole bunch of changes at once. And so, I mean, now it's at least, well, there was probably like 1 week where I was doing almost entirely XSLT. And then less and less after that. At this point, I'm making changes, once a month, once every other month or so. And we're pretty happy with our displays now. So it's not too often at this point. Yeah.
So you're sharing these displays with other members of Waldo who use
Oh, yeah.
Koha?
Yeah, they're. I don't know if my current version has been uploaded yet, but I think at least my last iteration of it is put on the Waldo wiki, I think. But yeah, if anyone wants to see it, you can have it. It's available. Any other questions?